And we just pray, Lord, that we would find it interesting. We think it is, of course, but that there would be a practical reason for this also, and that is that the Bible is a historical book, and we can give people the answers, some rumors or things that they may have heard, but we can go back to the Bible and show them proof of the Bible's evidence and how God started, you started all of this, and how this world became corrupt. We ask that you'd show us these things. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Okay, so let's turn to Genesis chapter 6. Okay, we have been going through a series in this, and I just want to, not that I want it to be long and prolonged, but I'm not trying to rush through it, but give some background today we'll be looking at some historical details of what we're going to be reading here. So it's the bizarre supernatural world of the Bible in Genesis chapter 6, the sons of God and the giants of Genesis 6, and we're looking at part 7. And we're continuing this mini portion, the ancient and current accounts of giants. Okay, in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 1, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them. So it's only human beings that we're talking about, not two different kinds of human, only humans. Verse 2, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. Now, in comparing Scripture with Scripture, the phrase sons of God is used specifically and only for spiritual beings in the Old Testament, so they're angels. And they took them wives of all which they chose. So these are fallen angels. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Now, a lot of stuff we've looked at, other verses in the New Testament, 3 primary passages dealing with and explaining who these giants were, what God did to them, what God did to the fallen angels. So without reviewing all of that, we're going to jump right into where we left off last week. Okay, so the ancient legends of giants. The Bible is real history. World history is a history of giants. You go, what? Since when? Well, yeah, not public school history. I'm not saying anything about public school. I mean, if you're going to be teaching history, you're going to be teaching primarily the things of historically that draw our nations together and stuff like this. But if you go back far enough, there is a lot of history. Now, sometimes it's called myth, and sometimes it is, about giants. So the stories of giants in the Bible, though, they're not myth. Those are real history. Now, I don't have the opportunity to go back to review those, all of them. Actually, we'll mention some of them in a little bit, just in reference, but we've made reference to the verses already. So if you're interested, this is a series on the giants if you want to go back and review. So other nations tell of giants. Today, anything that may go against the established religion of secular non-Bible, now I'm not saying it's a conspiracy, I'm simply saying it's human nature. Think of this, if you're in the secular history, but you happen to find giants or an ark in the mountains of Ararat, okay, or Joseph's granaries, if you find evidence of this, what modern secular history, it tries to minimize or just ignore that, and you would have to admit that you're wrong. This has happened already. In the late 1800s, I don't have the details here, but late 1800s, there began to be this focus, this culture of Bible trashing from a lot of liberal European secular colleges, saying that there was no such thing as King David, no such thing as Babylon. I mean, none of these things. They were saying all of it's just a myth. The Bible is fake, and it's just full of myths. Well, I think his name was Heinrich Schliemann. His last name was Schliemann. He was a German amateur archaeologist, and he always read about the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey. These are really, really ancient stories of ancient Greece. And one of them was about the city of Troy, where there was you heard the Trojan horse, okay, that, that there was a war between Troy and some other cities, and they constructed a huge horse, and the soldiers hid inside of it. And his dad would always read these stories, and he thought, man, it would be so cool if I could find it. And they're like, find it? It's a joke. It doesn't exist. He found it. He did. The rest is history. They're like, no way. You did? And so one thing fell after the other. They would always say there was no King David. They found, we don't need evidence from the secular sources to show that, but I love it when they have to admit that they're wrong. But, you know, on their front page they say it's not true. Page 6 is the apology, where no one sees it. So they found one thing after another. Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, all the things in the Bible, they're finding them. Cyrus, even the decree that Cyrus gave to release the Jews, they found it on this big, it's like this big stone, circular stone that tells the story. They found it on there, and they have to admit it. So, so anyway, you have to admit that, you know, I guess I was wrong. And then all the books and the funding, you got to undo all that now. So much true history has been forgotten, and much true history has been buried. Much true history has been, okay, I couldn't resist. When you turn something into something else, it's, well, in this case, if you make it into a myth, then it would be mystified. But anyway, so I thought, is that real? The real word would be mythologized. I mean, I thought it was onto something. So in its continual retelling, it sounds bigger than life and becomes mythology. So here's an example. In Greek mythology, Hercules was the son of a false god Zeus, the Greek father of the gods and of a mortal woman. Hercules fought alongside the gods and participated in something called the Gigantomachia, a great battle between the Olympian gods and the giants. The giants were a race of great strength and aggression, said to be the offspring of Gaia, which is earth, and Uranus, which is sky. Now, for the kids in here, this part is make-believe. It's mythology. But as we mentioned last week, and we're going to see more today, it's quite possible, more likely probable, that people like Hercules or Zeus were real people that were deified. Okay? So Hercules killed several of the prominent giants. They have names for him: Alcinous, Porphyrion, and Geryon. In addition, he killed multiple other giants. This is the legend of Hercules. Stories vary regarding the different number. However, Hercules' role as a crucial figure in the Gigantomachia, battling and slaying several giants, is a consistent theme across different versions of the legend. So that was Greek mythology, a corruption of real Bible history. Now, the more likely and closer to the real story and of the Bible, but first we have to have some background. Okay, this part, I love showing this, I mean, if it's of any interest to you, but where our histories come from. We have the ark. Noah builds the ark and his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All nationalities come from those three men, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and obviously their wives. So Ham went to Africa, and without going into the details, Ham's name literally means burnt or dark. It does, and he went to Africa, and he was darker skinned. Japheth would be the ancestor of Caucasian people, and if you go to northern India, this was a surprise to me before I started reading the Bible, but northern people in northern India are very light-skinned. We think of people from India as just really super dark, but actually many of them, in the northern part especially, are very light-skinned. So they have a caste system, and only white people, this is Hinduism, only white people in the higher caste can be in government, and at least it used to be this way. So if you look at their movie stars, by the way, Bollywood is just huge. It's even bigger than Hollywood. All of them, practically every single one, super light-skinned. The very rich, the very famous are light-skinned because they are descendants of Japheth. They're Caucasian. Now, you read about that in the book of Daniel when the descendants of the Medes and the Persians, the child of Japheth, his son was named Madai, and he's the ancestor of the Medes and the Persians. And that's why in northern Iran, they speak a language that's very close to European, even though it's way far in the east. Anyway, so background. Ham settled in Egypt. So remember Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Israel, so here's proof. Israel also came into Egypt. Jacob sojourned in, it's called the land of Ham. Here's some other verses. They showed his signs among them and wonders in the land of Ham, wondrous works in the land of Ham, and the terrible things by the Red Sea. So the Bible gives accurate history as to where the descendants of Noah settled. And we looked at last week where there's particular verses that say that it appears as if God, quote unquote, sat down and said to them, go and figure the layout of the land, map it, come back with a survey, and we're going to sit down and put you in the portions that I have given you. So that'd be part 6. But the word Egypt is our modern name given to the land of Ham by the Greeks. It has become the name of the country, but we missed the original name. So I want to show you this. It's a proof of that. So by the ancient peoples, Egypt was called Mizraim, okay, after the son of Ham. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham. And I'm repeating that verse because I want to show you this. So here's the exact same verse, Psalm 105:23. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham. So we're going to concentrate on the Hebrew portion of the word under Egypt. I know you don't know Hebrew, neither do I. Missed my opportunity there. I know you don't know Hebrew, but I do. I do not. So anyway, so we're going to concentrate on Egypt. Now I'm going to put underneath that one the word Mizraim. And the sons of Ham were Cush and Mizraim and Phut and Canaan. Okay, so in Genesis 10:6. So notice we're going to take that and put it right underneath there, and you'll see that the top one, Egypt, the word underneath there is Mizraim, and we put it underneath that Hebrew one there, and you can see that they're exactly the same. So Ham, or I should say Egypt, again, that's what the Greeks called it, and that's what we call it. So it's written that way in the Bible, but it's the name is actually Mizraim. And by using that name, you know who it was that settled it. Ham came there, and then when he passed on the authority of the kingship, it went to his son Mizraim. Okay, so here's another one. It's in Genesis chapter 50. So Egypt was called both the land of Ham and Mizraim. Now this is an account of when Jacob, or Israel, died. He wanted Joseph to promise him he was going to take his body all the way into the land where his dad and his grandpa and his grandmother, mom, were buried. So Genesis chapter 50, verse 7, Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, and all the house of Joseph, his brethren, his father's house. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond Jordan, and there they mourned with a great and very sore lamentation. And he made mourning for his father 7 days. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw them mourning in the floor of Atad, they said, "This is a grievous mourning to the Egyptians." In other words, the Mizraims. That's what it says. Okay. Wherefore, notice though how it's translated into English. Wherefore the name of it was called Abel Mizraim. Notice, there it is, Mizraim. What it's saying is this is the mourning of the Egyptians, the mourning of the descendants of Mizraim. That's how the entire nation of Egypt was known, as the Mizraimites. So Egypt was called both the land of Ham and Mizraim. So the Bible historically and accurately shows the places the descendants of Noah settle in their lands. Now, this part here, it has nothing so much to do with where we're going in Egypt today, but I just couldn't resist to show you some of these things. Notice the sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, and Javan. Okay, so that word Javan there in other places is used for Greece. So the Bible tells us who were the descendants that were the forefathers of the Greeks. It says, "When I have bent Judah for me, filled the bow with Ephraim, and raised up thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece." So it's used the word Greece there, but it's translated from the word Javan. Okay, and the sons of Javan were, some of them, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. But the sons of Javan that stayed in the Greek area, fine linen with embroidered work from Egypt, was that which thou spreadest forth to be thy sail, blue and purple from the isles of Elisha. So there's islands south of Greece that was covered thee. So anyway, Ethiopia is this actually the word Cush, and Libya is Phut. And I'm sure there's some dad jokes coming from that, I can sense. But anyway, so these were the sons of Ham, but where Cush settled, we call Ethiopia today, and Phut, Libya, etc. Anyway, so back to this. And sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Phut and Canaan. Now, let's show this. Let's concentrate now on Mizraim, because he's going to be the one that we're concentrating on the rest of the story. And so far, you're like, what does this have to do with giants? Okay, well, you'll see we're working up to that. Mizraim begat Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, and Naphtuhim. We're going to concentrate on these two guys. So Lehabim and Naphtuhim were great-grandsons of Noah, grandsons of Ham, and sons of Mizraim. So now, where ancient myth crosses over into actual history, this is interesting, and where the Bible identifies history, which turned into myth. The grandsons of Mizraim, one of them, was Naphtuhim, which we just mentioned. So as we mentioned last week, look, prior to the flood, the Bible mentions the kind of atmosphere and the pre-flood world was a very, very different world. They had a shell of water, which we read about in Genesis chapter 1, that increased the pressure. There was more oxygen, which we can learn scientifically from air samples trapped in amber or tree sap. With that atmosphere, it would be like a hyperbaric pressure chamber system in our modern medicine. People lived much, much longer. That's why, even medically speaking, you go back to Genesis chapters 5, why they were living to be 800 and 900 years old. That's why. It's not just exaggerated. It is true years. So the transition from pre-flood, you see, we'll show you a map or a graph here in a little bit. After the flood, ages just plummeted, but in the few hundred years after the flood, they're living to still 400 years old. What would happen if somebody was born during that time, which is exactly when Naphtuhim was born? And I mentioned it this way. Naphtuhim shows up at his great-great-great-great-great-grandson's funeral, and he looks younger than the one they're burying. Okay, so everywhere in the world there is ancestor worship, and they deified him, and possibly because he was so much bigger than life. We talked about last week about how the Greeks talked about a golden age where they lived longer, they ran faster, they were bigger, stronger. Anyway, it's because they were coming, the transition from pre-flood to post-flood world. So Naphtuhim was deified, mythologized, and turned into the name Neptune Mereoticus. Because his kingdom was the Isles of the Sea, Mereoticus turns into marine, and to this day, marine and Mereot deal still with the sea, the things of the sea. Or Neptune, he then becomes the false god of the sea. And that's where they have their statues. And because of the Greeks and Neptune's vanity, we've decided to put a very nice, stylish polo shirt and jeans on him. So Poseidon is the Roman version of the Greek false god Neptune, god of the seas. So ancient legends, myths show a post-flood world that quickly turned into chaos, bloodshed, treachery, interfamily wars, wars between cousins, fratricide, it's killing of brothers and sisters, and adultery. This is all after the Tower of Babel. Okay, the occult and witchcraft were common. A family feud, a war between brothers, between fathers and sons, all of this comes crashing down. Now, here's where I'm going to, just so I'm showing you my source. This is called The Forgotten History of the Western People. And he cites early, very, very early sources of ancient history that goes way, way back, just post-flood, writes about the Tower of Babel, all kinds of stuff that's in the Bible. But today they go, it gets a little too close to biblical things. So the following account of ancient history is from the writings of, his name is Raphael Holinshed, known as Holinshed's Chronicles. He wrote the Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland, and he put the histories together in one volume of what they believed or their legends about the forming of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Okay, so here we go. Mizraim was deified, and his name is in the ancient false Egyptian god of Osiris. They had their big three, Osiris, Isis, and I forget their child or whatever, but I'll refer to him mostly as Mizraim, but Isis or Osiris is in there. So Neptune was the son of Osiris from ancient history. Now, here we go. I said it a couple times already, sorry. Anyway, about the giants though. So Neptune legend has, in the histories of Holinshed, Neptune, and I'm not saying this is Bible, but it overlaps and it makes some sense of these things. It says, Neptune sailed the seas with his 33 giant sons. And here where we go with this ancient legends of giants. Sailing to each kingdom that Noah had set up with God to overthrow them. Okay, remember, so last week we talked about God, I'm not saying literally sits down, but he, lack of better terms, illustratively sits down with them and says, okay, this is where you're going. Or maybe they deal lots and decide who the sons are going where, 70 nations. Okay, well, remember the birthright. The oldest son, and in this case there's a lot of, older sons, and they're set up in these kingdoms so that, from all the different nations, to set up a kingship so that each successive generation would take upon them the helm of servant leadership. And it was used by kings, or the kingship was set up for that purpose. So Noah and his sons and grandsons set up these kingdoms. There's relative peace and safety until this happens. Neptune sailed the seas, 33 giant sons, sailing to each of these kingdoms that Noah had set up with God to overthrow those kingdoms, and then leaving each of the giant sons in a different place to overthrow the kingdoms that already existed and bring the world under their own tyrannical rule. Now this goes beyond legend, because this is exactly what lots of the ancient records will show. The giant sons that feature in the story are Albion, who invaded the island of Samothea, used to be called that, but that is modern England, with an army descended from Cush. To this day, the name of Albion is still used as a poetic or symbolic name for England. Now, also, Albion was the most ancient name, later superseded by the name Britain, but this is what I was going to mention. So according to this, England was quite possibly named after a giant, Albion. But Albion also means white, which England has, the White Cliffs of Dover. Now, there was another giant, Byrgion, the other giant brother, who invaded the island to the west of Samothea, became known as Hibernia, and is now called Ireland. So this is again written by Holinshed, ancient English chronicles. Lestrigo invaded Italy. So Osiris, or Mizraim, was opposed to their ambitions, so the giants held the judicial council with the support of their father Neptune and put Mizraim, their grandfather, to death. Remember, several months ago, we talked about ancient paganism and where these legends got their start from. That goes along right with this, how Nimrod was dismembered and deified. This event was the cause of great lamentation, was regularly observed in the religion of ancient Egypt. The practice was passed on to the Greeks and Romans, who lamented the deaths of Dionysius, that's the Greek version, and Bacchus. Also Nimrod. Okay, remember Lehabim. Okay, so we had mentioned this. Mizraim begat Ludum, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim. We've dealt with Naphtuhim as Neptune. Came Neptune Merioticus. Lehabim was surnamed, the Greeks, obviously each language has its own version of how it sounds. He was surnamed Libicus, and this seems to be what matches with the ancient legends of Hercules. Like, no way. He was possibly a real person? Well, Hercules Libicus, the Lehabim of the Bible, son of Mizraim, possibly, was infuriated by the murder of his father Osiris Mizraim and set out to kill the giant sons of Neptune, after him, wherever they could be found. So this is a real guy, if this is true, going around killing these giants. They go, it's just mythology. What if it's not? What if the Bible shows the reality of these giants? Now, here's where, if somebody hasn't seen the previous messages that lead up to this, if someone doesn't believe the Bible, but we're teaching people who do believe the Bible to show them and give them the proof and to bring this together of the amazing Bible that we have that shows real history. Okay, so we're the ones who know the Bible, we believe it, so it's written for us, but anyone can come along, and if they would see true history and see how the Bible coincides with that, they would see the validity of it. So anyway, he went to Spain and then to Italy. When the giants, Albion and Byrgion, heard that he was on his way to Italy, they set off to defend their brother Lestrigo and fought against Hercules on the banks of the Rhine in Germany, and Hercules defeats the giants. It is thought that Hercules later came to the island of Albion, arriving at a headland which Ptolemy, he was a very famous mathematician and astronomer, 145 AD in Egypt, calls Promontorium Herculis, now known as Hartland Point in North Devon. I mean, this is history. It's really specific. It says Hercules defeated the giants and then came to the island of Albion, named after the giant, and there is this particular point. He actually points out where it is, and to this day it's called Promontorium Herculis. They still have records of this. So the race of giants bred and multiplied greatly, spreading out over the earth just like the descendants of Noah. And I've tried to scrunch this together, but so much so that the Bible refers to whole areas as being inhabited by the giants. So Deuteronomy 2:20, which we've read already, was accounted a land of giants. Giants dwelt there in old time. Ammonites called them Zamzamims. So these giants' behavior was so detestable, and possibly their DNA behavior could infect normal human beings, that we are assuming God made a special war with them. In Genesis 14, it mentions Chedorlaomer, and the kings that were with him smote the Rephaims, Zuzims, and the Emims. These are descendants of the giants in their day. And let's see, it would be Deuteronomy chapter 2 and verse 21. A people great and many and tall as the Anakims, but the Lord destroyed them before them, and they, the Ammonites, succeeded them. When we see historically the things written by Native Americans about some of these giants, their behavior, if that's consistent with these ancient ones here, we would see why the Lord destroyed them, because they were, in most cases, cannibalistic, at war with everyone around them, and very, very evil, practicing occultism and stuff. Thus, the prominent historical theme of war against them, their consistent conduct against God and his people, which Og, king of Bashan, the Anakims, Goliath, and his brother and sons. Again, we don't know if they were supernaturally derived hybrids. Now, I want to make a distinction here, because the Bible does not say that they were hybrids between angels and man, but it does not say that they weren't. So I'm just being honest. But something to keep in mind is that first of all the fallen angels prior to the flood are placed in prison or hell or Tartarus below the earth. It mentions that in one of the 1st or 2nd Peter. And their giant offspring were killed in the flood. So all of them prior to the flood are wiped out. So any post-flood giants have nothing to do with the pre-flood giants or the fallen angels. Okay? So if fallen angels being with earthly women took place after the flood, then it would be like starting all over again. So maybe it did happen that way, but the Bible just doesn't give us that information. So we'd be assuming too much to say that. Now, here's another ancient historian. His name was Berosus. He writes about the Tower of Babel and all kinds of stuff. He's a Chaldean historian. Belus, says Castor, was king of the Assyrians, and under him the Cyclops assisted Jupiter with thunderbolts and lightnings in his contest with the Titans. At that time there were kings of the Titans, one of whom was Ogyges. After a short digression, he proceeds to say that the giants, in their attempted inroad upon the gods, were slain by the assistance of Hercules and Dionysius, who were themselves of the Titan race. As it gets further back in time, it's not written as myth anymore. It's written as history. Okay, there's other stories of the giants and Hydra and Hercules. So let me mention here. Hercules, the giant killer. Albion, the giant of Britain, that takes place roughly in 1700 BC, 620 some years after the flood, and would put him roughly in this generation right here, which would mean that he was living into his 400-year-old time frame, which would mean that he could be around for quite a while, and he would be considered one of the gods. All he was a human that had not yet, in his generation, made the transition to what we have today, where we die in our 70s and 80s. Okay, so is it silly mythology? Chedorlaomer, the giants, and the kings that were with him smote the Rephaims, giants, and the Zuzims, probably giants. Emims were giants. In Kiriathaim, Moses fought the giant Og in 1500 BC. And by the way, these things take place in 1900 BC. Joshua was fighting the giants in 1500 BC. David and his mighty men fought Goliath and his sons about 1000 BC. They're giants, and Look, Goliath, it's not just a myth. It's not just, well, it's just illustrative. We all have to face giants, and that's all it's really saying is just no, he was a literal giant, and he had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on, I shouldn't say he did, but one of his sons did. And that is Bible. God is writing down history. Now, last week I mentioned the Mohawk legend. I'll mention this really quick again for those that may not have heard it. But now we're in modern times, closer to our modern times. The giants, it's out of order here. The giants were called the Allegheny, where the chain of Allegheny Mountains comes from. They had a stronghold across the river. They would kill members of the Mohawk people. The giants were cannibals. They would easily grab a warrior. This is a Native American mentioning this, the legends, and bite off. So the giants would grab a warrior, bite off his head, and drink the blood. These are nasty, I don't know if I call them people, but nasty giants. The Mohawk put out a call to gather the Native American nations in the Iroquois Confederacy. The Huron responded, with the Creator's help, we can destroy them. They were victorious. We mentioned this, a wampum belt records the victory, records the story of the battle against the giants, and the Mohawk and the Huron would be at peace with each other. Common themes of ancient man regarding giants. Okay, almost done here, about at a half hour. I'll read something here really quick. There's so much more to read, but in previous messages we've shown pictures of petroglyphs. And many of these petroglyphs show either this person's much larger than these smaller people here, and they are at war with each other. And it shows the bigger ones having 6 toes on each foot and 6 fingers on each hand. So the consistency of ancient myth, the legend, modern Native American stories, the giants were all violent. They were cannibals. If they would not war with people and eat them, they would war with themselves and eat each other. I remember reading a theory one time that if these things are true, the theory that their craniums would not allow for growth, would create violent behavior, because now that might be a medical reason, but is there a spiritual reason? Are they so corrupt that this is resorting to the spiritual decadence of eating people, cannibalism? Other strange things, 2 rows of teeth. The Bible doesn't mention that. In many cases, bright red hair. The Bible does mention this. Here's where the Bible and history overlap again. One of Goliath's sons, 6 fingers and toes, and there was yet a battle in Gath, where was a man of great stature that had on every hand 6 fingers and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number, and he also was born to the giant. Okay, with the time that I have left, this is a book called Life Among the Paiutes, Wrongs and Claims, by Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, and she mentions this legend. I'll try to read this. Among the traditions of our people is one of a small tribe of barbarians who used to live along the Humboldt River. It was many hundred years ago. They used to waylay my people and kill and eat them. They would dig large holes in our trails at night, and if any of our people traveled at night, which they did, for they were afraid of these barbarous people, they would oftentimes fall into these holes. That tribe would even eat their own dead. Yes, they would even come up and dig up our dead after they were buried, and would carry them off and eat them. Now and then they would come and make war on my people. They would fight, and as fast as they killed one another on either side, the women would carry off those who were killed. My people say they were very brave. When they were fighting, they would jump up in the air after the arrows that went over their heads and shoot the same arrows back again. My people took some of them into their families, but they could not make them like themselves. So at last they made war on them. This war lasted a long time. Their number was about 2,600. The war lasted some 3 years. My people killed them in great numbers, and what few were left went into the thick bush. My people set the bush on fire. This was right above Humboldt Lake. Then they went to work and made tule or bulrush boats and went into Humboldt Lake. They could not live there very long without fire. They were nearly starving. My people were watching them all around the lake and would kill them as fast as they would come on land. At last, one night, they all landed on the east side of the lake and went into a cave near the mountains. It was a most horrible place, for my people watched at the mouth of the cave and would kill them as they came out to get water. My people would ask them if they would be like us and not eat people like coyotes or beasts. They talked the same language, but they would not give up. At last, my people were tired. And they went to work and gathered wood and began to fill up the mouth of the cave. Then the poor fools began to pull the wood inside till the cave was full. At last my people set it on fire, and at the same time they cried out to them, "Will you give up and be like men and not eat people like beasts? Say quick, we will put out the fire." No answer came from them. My people said that they thought the cave must be very deep or far into the mountains. They had never seen the cave nor known it was there until then. On a side note, look, I understand some of this can sound kind of like, okay, you believe all this? I'm simply giving you the information that's written down. I can't decide for anybody. All I can say personally is this: the Bible talks about giants, post-flood giants, and a lot of history about giants. And could it be that they were still around just 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago in North America? I mean, why not? She seems to think they were. So anyway, they called out to them as loud as they could, "Will you give up?" Say yes. Okay. But no answer came. Then they all left the place. And, I was going to say, this I can't verify, obviously, but I've heard that in these areas, in some caves, they have found very, very large, 7, 8, 9 foot tall bodies with red hair. I've also heard that what can happen is as hair ages, it can turn red, but it can also be red before. So then they all left the place. In 10 days, some went back to see if the fire had gone out. They went back to my 3rd or 5th great-grandfather and told him they must all be dead. There was such a horrible smell. This tribe was called People Eaters, and after my people had killed them all, the people around us called us Sedokara. It means conqueror. It also means enemy. I do not know how we came by the name Paiutes. It is not an Indian word. I think it is misinterpreted. Sometimes we are called pine nut eaters, for we are the only tribe that lives in the country where pine nuts grow. My people say that the tribe we exterminated had reddish hair. I have some of their hair, which has been handed down from father to son. I have a dress which has been in our family a great many years, trimmed with this reddish hair. I am going to wear it sometime when I lecture. It is called the mourning dress, as in sadness, and no one has such a dress but my family. Anyway, Sitka is what they called those people. So that's, again, from Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins. All I'm trying to do is not decide for anybody, but to give you the information so you can decide for yourself. And hopefully we've done that here today, but obviously using the Bible as our base. Okay, so anyway, if you have any questions, please ask. Next week I'll continue this, but very short period of the giants. There's so much we could mention more, but the point has been made. I'll transition to something else, though, along these lines. So let's go ahead and close with prayer. We thank you, Lord, just for all you've done for us. Thank you for this, showing the truth, that we don't have to be ashamed of giving historical proof and truth. And if others want to believe it, they can. If they don't want to, that's up to them. But we've at least given the truth of historical accounts and your word. And I just pray, Lord, that we would be strengthened by it and have that ready